So here's the conclusion to the decomposition reaction. If you remember from lecture, we talked about what does decomposition mean? Something that's decomposing, something that's falling apart. What we have in this experiment is we have one material, which is the hydrogen peroxide, and it's falling apart into some other things. Let's go ahead and answer these questions. What visual evidence do you observe that shows a chemical reaction is taking place? Oftentimes with a chemical reaction, you see a color change. Well, color change didn't occur in this reaction. What was the other piece of evidence that we saw that there's a chemical reaction taking place? If there are bubbles or gases or scents that are put off from a liquid, oftentimes you can assume that that's a chemical reaction. So the visual evidence from this is bubbles were being produced, or bubbles were produced. So we're going to get back to what were those bubbles. So we took the wooden splint and we lit it with a match, and we allowed the splint to burn for a few seconds until it was nice glowing orange. We blew the splint out, placed it above the opening. We record what happens below. What happens below is the splint reignites. The splint reignites. Question is, why did it reignite? In this experiment, we're starting off with hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. Again, subscripts are very, very important. If we didn't have that 2, it would just be H2O, it would just be water. But we have H2O2. That's why we can't actually balance equations by changing the subscripts, because that changes the chemical formula. So we had this H2O2, and we had this in this black substance. We added this manganese dioxide to it. Now, the manganese dioxide has nothing to do with the chemical reaction. It actually speeds up the chemical reaction, but the manganese dioxide is not used up whatsoever. All it really does is it splits this into smaller pieces. So this is our reactant, and it's going to decompose or fall apart into other substances. Let's go ahead and put a blank there for a coefficient, and it's going to break apart, and it's going to be producing water. That's one of the components that's going to be produced in this reaction. And it also produces bubbles. Now, what is the possibility that our bubbles can be? Well, we only have H and O as possibilities. So it could either be H2, which would be hydrogen, or it would be O2, and it would be oxygen. If you remember, we did something very similar where we produced hydrogen gas, and when we put a splint that was lit, it produced a pop. Well, no pop was produced in this reaction. So it's not the hydrogen, it's not the H2. It actually produces O2. So this is going to be giving us a chance to balance this again. How many H's do we have on the left? We have 2. How many do we have on the right? We have 2. How many do we have on the left? We have 2. How many do we have on the right? We have 3. Okay, so that's going to be kind of hard to balance things. In this case, the best thing to do is we're going to try to make an odd number. We have 1 here and 2 here, so we have 3. We need to make this odd number into 4. And the easiest way to do this is to add a 2 right there. This gives us 2 times 1, which is 2. And then 1 times 2 is 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. This makes it even because we need to have an even number with this 2 over here. So this gives us 4 oxygens. So 2 times what will give us 4? And it's going to be 2. Well, let's see if that balances out the hydrogens as well. 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 times 2 is 4. This balances our reaction. So why did the splint glow so much? Well, it's because we created this, O2, and we were creating 100% oxygen. Inside air is about 20% oxygen. The other remnants of the air is actually nitrogen. It's 80% N2, nitrogen. What we breathe is about 20% O2. So if you recall, when things burn, it requires oxygen. If you have the candle in the jar and you cover it with the jar, the oxygen is used. So if we have more oxygen, things are going to be able to burn. So oxygen right here, this actually helps things to burn. Oxygen helps things burn. So if we have air, we have 20% oxygen. But we actually had 100% oxygen on the inside of the flask. How many times more oxygen do we have? Compare 20 versus 100. We have 5 times the O2 in the flask. That's why the splint reignites, is because we have such a high concentration of oxygen that it allows the splint to reignite.